Hi, everyone, and welcome, or hopefully welcome back. And if you were able to make it to our first session in this Higher Ed LinkedIn Live series last week, led by our friends and colleagues, Kia and Jamie. I'm Lauren Malhoit, and I'll be your host here, the voice of the customer, if you will. But of course, I brought with me the real Higher Ed expert, Mike Newcomb. Mike, how is it going today?
Oh, it's awesome, Lauren. It's always good to see you and glad to be here for this really fun topic.
Awesome. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about how these sessions work before we get started. Our first one, like I said, was last week where we covered student recruitment actually, but from a technology perspective and how you can use technology for things like student engagement, student recruitment. This week, we'll be covering the very important topic of reducing cost. I know that's something that everyone is definitely interested in. As always, though, I want to remind you that this is a live event. And the reason we do it is to hear from all of you. Give us your hard-hitting questions. We'll answer them in real time. We have some things prepared, but we'd much rather hear from all of you. So let's get started, Mike. I'm guessing you cover the topic of cost reduction a lot with your customers. It's kind of a weird point counterpoint dichotomy situation when we're talking about implementing new technology, but also talking about reducing cost. I want to know from your perspective, what's changed in the last 5 or 10 years that we can actually talk about both topics at the same time? What are some of these things that higher ed institutions are really trying to get after? What are the use cases that they're trying to accomplish, and what's changed from last 5 or 10 years?
Sure. Yeah, Lauren, it's very interesting, right? I've been in the industry for almost 40 years, and what has happened over just the last 2 or 3 has been remarkable compared to where we've been. And it's not just networking when we talk about switches and routers. It's really the on-ramp, which is the wireless networking, that has made a difference. But realistically, it's not just the hardware that we're talking about. It's the software and the ability to actually finally use artificial intelligence to help us to correlate all this massive amount of data that we get. There's a lot of it coming in all the time, and it's growing, the amount of data that's being used. And if you look at the architectures that most of the networks have been based on, especially in Wi-Fi over the last 10 or 15 years, is all based in this older architecture of controllers. And at the time, it was appropriate. When you came to what I would call the second generation, it was all about centralizing the data so you can manage it, and then understand that the whole point of wireless was just to get somebody onto the internet. What we've seen is a huge change. I would call it a paradigm shift in networking just over the last couple of years. Um, and this is one of the reasons why Juniper actually purchased a company called Mist. Not so much for the Wi-Fi, but really it was about the artificial intelligence that focused on the experience that somebody had with the products in play, right? And how does it affect the experience of a student? How does it help and affect the experience of a administrator, the people that are doing the network? All of these things have changed tremendously because of this new technology, this finally a new generation of architectures that have come into play to be able to now create a platform for the future. And that platform for the future should be able to do more than just get you on the internet. It really does. It needs to be very simplified and straightforward.
Yeah, no, so I'm hearing a few things here. It's not just that, a piece of hardware has changed. We've changed the antenna array or anything like that. I mean, surely there are some things like that, but it's really the software that's involved in one small box, or if you have 6,000 small APs, right? So I'm hearing AI, I'm hearing a controllerless architecture. Both those things are separate in and of themselves. So let's start with AI. How is that bringing in a cost reduction? I mean, we talk about AI, it's the silver bullet, right? Everyone's talking about AI. What is the actual use case that we're trying to solve? There are several, right? So how do we relate that back to cost reduction then?
Sure. Well, so when you think about what we talk about with the amount of data that needs to be crunched in any environment, when you're sitting there trying to diagnose somebody calling into the help desk saying, my experience is bad. In fact, sometimes they don't call, they just gripe, and then you get a bad Yelp review for the university. It's like, what's going on? But they look at it and they go, the light's green. What ends up happening in that environment, people have to go out there, and the diagnosis of trying to solve one trouble ticket can take from hours to days. Because when somebody's having a bad experience, it's usually starting with the person having a bad experience calling the help desk, which means everything gets bad. Well, to do that, you have to collect data. And that's important. You have to collect a lot of data to be able to understand it. And that's why in the old architectures, and I know that we wanted to talk about how AI does it, but unless you understand specifically the architecture of a controller-based architecture that is built in the last generation, for example, you don't have that data. And so you end up having to, in the case of some of our competition, for example, they'll have all these controllers and then they'll go, oh, you want to do management? Oh, okay, here, buy this, CAPE sensors, and I have to put those in. Oh, you want to do Bluetooth tracking, like for things like that? I want to go buy another piece of gear, okay? The reason I bring this up, because AI, when you're talking about the kind of product that we have. So for example, I've got a missed access point here, AP43, one of the best it's the best in the industry today, according to Gartner. When you look at this device and you have the fact that you've got your wireless antenna here, you have a Bluetooth array built in, and this Bluetooth array is not like anybody else's Bluetooth. We're talking about an array that can get distance and location within 1 to 3 meters. And then you've got telemetry all in a single box. What's exciting about this is that it does this in a single box, but imagine how much data it generates, okay? So for example, every user that comes into our network, every user is over 150 data points that are collected every second for every user, all going to the cloud. Think about how much data that is. So that's a huge amount of data, and normal people would not be able to correlate it, right? In the old way you do it, you get your file and you look at it and you try to diagnose it. Here you need something to do it, and so that's where AI comes in. The AI and machine learning engine that we use is very unique, and we've had 2, 3, 4 years of data where as everybody is in the cloud experiencing what's going on, the engine gets smarter and smarter and smarter to understand what's going on. So now AI produces something that is very unique to help reduce costs. For example, in trouble ticketing, AI can now, instead of me having to go send somebody out to go collect data, then I bring it back and analyze it. Now you have the situation where you can actually go in and say, hey, AI, our AI engine's called Marvis. Hey, Marvis, what are my unhappy users? And then ask, why is that guy unhappy? Oh, you mean it's because, again, you don't have to go do data collection. It's all there. It's in the cloud. AI engine's already correlating it for you. And you say, these are the 5 users that are having trouble. And it's all DNS requests. You've got something wrong with your DNS server. Or your VLAN is missing. And so here's somebody that's off having a bad experience in a certain part of the university. And you go, well, I don't know why. And you're diagnosing it for a long time. And you find out that it's a missing VLAN. Well, the missing VLAN, instead of me having to do that, the AI engine goes out and says, oh my gosh, you're missing this, I'll let you know. So in a way, you're finding out things are happening before they can open a trouble ticket. That increases their satisfaction, right?
Yeah, you know, Mike, there's actually some numbers there. All right. So for every 1 trouble ticket that a customer desk might receive, there's probably 5 or 10 more users out there that are having an issue as well, that are just having that unhappy experience. Like you suggested, maybe they're just complaining on Twitter, going to Yelp, doing all the things, complaining about the whatever higher ed boards, you know, on the higher ed websites where people complain about their professors or complain about the university, right? And I think that's really important to point out, because student experience is, you know, a huge factor for higher ed institutions. But we're also talking about the cost reduction that comes with not having to send out, like you said, a help desk employee or a student volunteer in a lot of cases that just wouldn't be able to find this, you know, comparing CLI, doing some show configs. It's just, it would take hours and hours and hours, whereas Marvis will come in and say, you know, this is what's wrong, here's a suggested action, or we'll even take on some self-driving initiatives as well if people are comfortable with that, right?
Absolutely. You know, Lauren, that's a good point, because when you talk about the people that have to manage this network, they're expensive resources, and you don't want them working on things that I would call the mundane, keeping the lights on. You'd rather have them focused on being able to provide applications that can leverage this new tool that we have. For example, I want to develop a roll call application or use something so that when my students walk around the campus, and I think I'm an adjunct professor, been one for 40 years in the CIS world. And you look at this and you say, gosh, to have somebody be able to come into my room and understand, you want your people working on really strategic things to improve retention and things like this versus keeping it open. Universities that have adopted what I'm showing you today will tell you that actually now that what they do is they staff it with student workers. The frontline thing, and all they do is run Marvis, ask the question, it's almost like a George Jetson event, ask the question, how's my network today? And immediately they know what to do, and then they can look through it, in many cases, fix it on their own, because it gives you in the Marvis AI engine, here's the way to fix this, right? Machines should configure machines, right? So in some cases, they can even push the button to make those things happen. But it's a big differentiator to say, let me take my really key resources, the guys that are the strategic and architectural guys, let's put them on
and gals,
things, right? Yes. and gals.
No, and I think that is a really important thing to point out, but also just employee morale, burnout. I've worked help desk, and there is not a long life length to someone working that kind of job who's just constantly dealing with complaints. Churn and burn is obviously very expensive, no matter where you work. So trying to avoid some of that by doing, taking away the mundane tasks, taking away all the complaints, and working on some cool stuff like that, I think is really important. I think another thing that can lead to burnout and lower morale is dealing with a controller based architecture. I know I've deployed them before, and then you're attaching in some sort of radius server for authentication, and then you have to actually plug in your APs and update all the firmware for each AP. And when we're talking about 3 APs, it's not a huge deal. We're talking about 4,000, 6,000, 10,000. That is a time sink.
Well, and to add on to what you're saying, that's really important to what you just mentioned, right? When you're talking about a controller architecture like this, and what's ending up happening is, as you said, everything is coming to this central place, and it's very restrictive. And because of the fact there are so many dependencies, so like I said, if you're doing with a controller, you've got a controller, you've got a controller of controllers, you've got to have CAPE sensors for management, you've got to have Bluetooth beacons. And again, I had one university complain to me that they went and did like thousands of beacons and didn't realize that they had to change the batteries every 6 months. And so they would have all this, they would just spend days just going out changing batteries in the beacons, right? What happens there, Lauren, is that architecture is very fragile. If you notice in a controller-based world, they don't have you update the architect. They don't give you the software update. Hey, new controller software, let's update that. Because the minute you do that, all the other dependencies of these other systems that are kind of tagged on break, right? Yeah. And so that cost alone, let alone, you've already talked about lots of cost for maintenance for more devices, too many things, as opposed to having the alternative of something that is just in the cloud. And in the case of Marvis and our Mist architectures, always updated every day. You get the best every day.
And Mike, let's talk about security costs too. So if you're not upgrading the firmware or the software on your controllers, there are certainly security patches that come out all the time, but if you're only upgrading every few years, even every year or so, that there could be a big cost associated with that and your wireless network, right?
Yes. No, you're right on. The thing that I will tell you about this whole thing, it's about a platform, and having a platform where you have less equipment, right, to have to deal with, and simplification of how you do it. So, another cost reduction, for example, is what does it cost to install stuff, right? And I'll give you an example. I'm going to ask you, Lauren, we had a recent university that deployed 2,000 access points with us. Now, forgetting that, just in your experience, to install 2,000 access points would take how many days?
Oh, The last time I did a deployment like this, I was only deploying about 5 access points. It took me a few weeks actually to get the controller working, to get all the right firmware, to make sure everything was in the right place, doing all of the heat mapping and all of that. So I imagine for 2000, I mean, you got to make sure there's not a microwave nearby for every single AP. I imagine that's months. I mean, 4, 5, 6 months.
So here's the surprising one. I love this story it's a university up in the Northeast that implemented over 2,000 access points in their dorms. They did it in 2 days. 2 days. They just walked around. They had student workers would walk around because it's nice. They had a certain other vendor's bracket there. They just unplugged the one, threw it away, and then plugged ours right into the bracket, and then plugged in the wire, and it fit. And it worked, and it was up. All 2,000 in 2 days. Now, here's the funny thing. It could have been done in 1 day, but the reason it didn't get done in 1 day was the student workers wanted more student hours to be able to do it. So
I was there, 20 years ago.
You know how it is. Students love to have the extra hours for credit toward their classes. And so they did that. And so they were all part of that. But to be able to say that is a testament to the architecture and what underlies it, right? Which is the AI engine, which automatically recognizes things that are going on from a diagnosis perspective, but it's also that architecture to be able to say, it's in the cloud. All I got to do is plug it in. I got a network connection, and I'm off, and I'm good to go immediately.
So there are 2 things I want to cover in our last couple of minutes here, Mike. I know we're coming to the end, but first of all, you mentioned the brackets. Our brackets fit, right? I mean, their brackets already fit, right? You don't have to buy more brackets, and that could actually be an expense as well, especially when you're buying 2,000. So you just pop it right onto your old bracket that held your old AP. We don't have to spend too much time on it. It's not sexy, but at the same time, it is something worth mentioning. What I want to bring in, you've mentioned Bluetooth beacons a few times. I know we use the virtual Bluetooth low energy within our access point, and then no battery beacons. Again, a cost reduction. But tell me more about how that actually works. What are the use cases that universities are using these location services for?
Sure. Yeah. So it's exciting. You can tell I get excited about this because it's something nobody's ever been able to do. So when you talk about location services, for example, University of Texas Arlington, which will freely tell you how they're using it to help their students navigate on the campus, they're able to set up and say, "Hey, where's my instructor?" And they're able to query it, and because it's all there, they can say, "My instructor is over here. Here's how you get there," and it provides a full journey mapping to get there. Other things that have taken place, like the world of COVID, right, and contact tracing, it was immediately, because the data is all there about all this location stuff of where people is, you immediately had the ability to look and say, how long did somebody dwell in a particular room? How long did somebody, who were they around over the last 30 days? You're not having to, do anything. It's data that's already there and correlated, and our analytics engine will be able to tell it. So someone in administration, once they've been informed that somebody has had COVID, they're immediately able to let the person know, that all the people that were around them, hey, you might want to go get tested. Of course, there's all the HIPAA requirements. Those are all respected. The data stays local. It's not like you're doing that, but it's definitely something that provides this extra architecture. And then as an instructor, where before, when you put up an access point, you can say, okay, here's my coverage model. And then you want to say to yourself, I want to know when somebody is in this room, right? Because the access point can go and bleed over. Well, with a Bluetooth virtual beacon, you can say, this is the size of this room. So when I'm in my computer science lab, I can see who's in my computer science lab with a lot of granularity. I can see when they moved in, when they moved out. You can say, the other things is just funding things like libraries that, how often did it use? Did they go to the tutoring area? What area of the library did they go to? Right? So there's wonderful things like this. The art of the possible when it comes to the programmer's kit that can come with this. And by the way, there's lots of companies that make stuff that go to this. It's amazing what can be done with an architecture that has everything in one thing.
You know, I think those are fantastic examples. I also think about just promoting on-campus stores, coffee shops, bookstores, whatever. But I do, and I know we have to, they're telling me we have to stop, we have to end this. But one more huge cost savings thing that I think we would be remiss not to discuss, especially in relation to location services, is actually what physical buildings are you using on campus, and do I need them?
Yeah, and actually, we'll be doing one of these later on, and for the facilities people to understand it. But when it comes to cost savings for a university, it's amazing how often that we get used to here are the rooms, and so we deploy them. Well, let's just say that there's less classes in a certain point. It's really easy to understand how many people are in a place that in a specific room or auditorium, and to be able to consolidate that into a single building, thus allow you to get gain efficiencies from the less power and things like that, right? So having that ability to look at how used the room is lets you do this. It also lets you know where you need to clean better for COVID, right? And be able to dispatch people that says, hey, this is where a lot of people are, spend more time here, probably not so much time up there, and just do your normal clean. But here's where all the people have been from the standpoint of that kind of cleaning. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's awesome. Mike, any closing words before we sign off?
No, I would love to talk to anybody that wants to talk with me. My whole life is higher education, and I love doing this. From a consulting standpoint, talking about the art of the possible. Just simply reach out to me at mnewcomb@juniper.net, and I'm happy to talk to anybody that would like to know more.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Mike. As always, we get to have these conversations all the time, but I'm glad we were able to share them with our customers and our prospects. Yeah, reach out anytime. I want to make sure folks know, please register again for next week. In the following week, we will be running these sessions until September. It's a different topic every single week. Next week will be cost efficiency from a 360 view, so from the university perspective. So thanks again, all, and we'll catch you next week.
We'll see you in the future. Bye.